Alright, and welcome to this series of videos, Scots Language and Accent. The past 10 years or so, I've spent a lot of my time travelling around about Scotland, talking with folk about how they talk, finding out how folk talk over Scotland, and looking at different ways to become literate in that way that we talk. Generally, it's this thing we call Scots. It's a Germanic language that's spoken in Scotland, and it's related to English, but the way that we write English tends more towards this idea, this concept of Scots Standard English, which is known as talk properly in a lot of places. So I've worked with folk. A lot of the work that I do is with singing, acting, and I've worked with folk, singers, MCs, writers, actors, all folk that talk this way, that's different if you talk proper. That's what we conceptualise as Scots language. And what I'm going to do in these videos is go through Scots as it's spoke nowadays in different parts of Scotland, or Scotland the way it's wrote in different ways. I know a lot of that's involved. A lot of what's involved in what I do is making folk gain literacy, learn about literacy in Scots. Now, that's not just about learning how to read and write in Scots, it's the more general kind of concept of becoming aware, becoming literate in this language. And the way that I come at it, you can look at languages as a language, something that sits out there as an abstract idea, usually held in dictionaries and grammar books. But language is also a behaviour, and that's the point of view that I take it. I look at how folk actually speak. Language is the thing that you speak, and there's this variety of language that's spoke all throughout Scotland, and it's been spoke for over 1,000 years in Scotland, and we've got 700 years worth of literature in the country. So what I'm doing now with these videos is I'm going to share a lot of the knowledge that I've gained and the information that I want to share with folk, hopefully for folk that talk this way, folk that blether away that their first language is in what we call Scots. And for other folk that are within Scotland that speak proper, that speak Scots Standard English, a lot of this is relevant because the accent that we use to speak English in Scotland comes from Scots. It's got a different history in it, and it should, even if you're working in English with a Scots accent, that should give you a lot more insight. So where I'm coming at, it's not a prescriptive way, like this is how you should speak Scots, this is the right way to speak Scots. It's a descriptive way. It's a way of looking at the language as it's spoke, as it's used in writing, as it's used in scripts, as it's used in song, things like that, rapping, poetry, even down to tweets on social media, any form of kind of writing and the spoken language as it is. And I hope to impart some of this information to you. The only thing that I would say that would be prescriptive is, personally, I kind of rather if folk come at using this language know to characterise somebody. So often you'll find folk use Scots to represent somebody for a particular class or a particular kind of way of living, maybe a rural way of living or a kind of historical, looking back at things. But Scots is it's a modern language, and it's spoke with folk all levels of society. What I find travelling about is there's a lot of folk that are feared to talk Scots in public, even though they'll talk at home. So they give this impression that they talk proper, the full way, all the time. But in actual fact, they switch between broader Scots and standard English with a Scottish accent. So that's a kind of what I find. So I'd say use this, what I'm going to impart to you. I absolutely, it can be used to tell stories and relate experiences for folk in every level of society. Using it to stereotype folk, that's kind of gash patter. So I'd say kind of avoid that if you can. So what I'm going to do is we're going to start looking at this. I get this. What is Scots? You know, what is this thing? What's your favourite Scots word? And we'll start off with that conception. Folk often think Scots is just a wheen of words. And let's see. So we've got this here. So these are uniquely Scots words. Scots words that get nothing to do with standard English. So we've got loads of these. These are, you can kind of conceptualise them as some folk maybe cruelly call them tea towel words, you know, words that you'll find that are kind of highlighted as Scots. So there's thousands of words out there, and there's a book's going to be freely available through my website, and I'll put the link in the bottom of the videos here so as you can get to it. There are literally tens of thousands of these uniquely Scots words, and you find them in the Scots dictionary, Scots language dictionary. You can find them. But we'll have a wee look at some of them here. So you'll maybe recognise some of these. If you're a Scots speaker, same with any language, you'll not necessarily use every single word in a language. That's the same for every single language. Nobody kens all the words in their own language. But hopefully you'll get a load of these. So we've got words like keek, to have a wee look at something. Sprachel, that's taking a struggle. Thole is to suffer or endure something. Pech is to be out of breath. Not able to breathe. If you've run up the stairs, you're maybe pecking. Dreich is quite a universal word over Scotland for weather. Another one, har or hor, that you get here. Mainly you'll find that in bits of Scotland where the hor comes in through the North Sea. It's a kind of sea mist. Drucket, another one that you'll get in the good Scots weather. Champit, that's kind of mashed totties, champit totties, potatoes. We've got wildlife words like clegg. I think that's called a horse fly or a brown fly in other places. Words describing were mood, crabbit, or situations like a burach. Burach's a kind of heap of stuff all heaped up. Then we've got kind of innovations, words like honours, to give somebody a hand, gives honours in a fight or an argument or something like that. And if there's a burach going on or a wee stramash or something like that, you can shout for honours. Then we've got words like snib for the door or sneck, and they get used for your neb, your nose. Physog, that's one that comes from Greek originally. Words like curi, to kind of cuddle in. Then we've got other words that describe kind of ways that we talk and interact with one another. You've got flyting. That's a kind of older Scots form of poetry. It's a way of insulting one another. Sometimes it's compared to like rap battles and things like that. A flyting. You've got a sherican. A sherican is a word to kind of describe giving somebody a row in public so that they get a right sherican, so that you're shaming them in front of everybody. So we've got these uniquely Scots words, and a lot of folk, that's kind of where their concept of Scots ends. It's just a couple of words or a handful of words. But once you start counting them up, as I say, there's thousands and thousands of these. These are part of the Scots language. Some of these are fallen out of use. What tends to persist are the ones that are in the next list. And these are the ones that can meet folk telling you off for using them. So these are Scots words that are related to English words. cognate is one of the ways to kind of describe these. And these words actually, they predate the ones in the brackets here. So hoose, house, water, water, hunners, hundreds, trousers, trousers, finger versus finger. That's pronounced differently. We'll find out more about that as we go on in the course here. Duke, duck. So that's the duke under something. That has different meanings for the English word duck. Duke can be, you can duke various things or even put something up your duke. We find that with a lot of words that are related to English words that they've got different meanings. Glad, glad, isle, oil, stay versus stay. And what we find with these words, so these words, the Scots pronunciation, hoose, water, hunners, you know, that, as I say, they kind of predate this, these pronunciations. These are kind of conscious corrections that are used so house rather than hoose. It's in order to sound more similar to a standard English. So over the past couple of 100 years, we've been labouring under this kind of misapprehension of our language as being some form of corruption of the dialect of the ruling classes in the southeast England. So that's how these words came about: house, water, hundreds, trousers. These are all innovations. They're all in a way constructed, and the more kind of natural developed words that have got a greater historical provenance are words like hoose, water, hunners, trousers, fingers, duke, court. And if we go through that, we'll have a wee look a wee bit later in this we talk here at these, but we found that the most common words in standard English, more than half of them have got these Scots cognates, these ones that have got the greater historical provenance and the ones that folk use. So these, sometimes folk conceptualise these as being rang, so hoose is rang and house is the right way to say it, but neither of them are rang. Hoose and house aren't, neither of them are rang. All languages are just a bunch of sounds that we make that we'll find out in a bit, and then they become codified and written down. So none of these are rang, but if you're wanting to categorise them, you would say that the ones on the left here are the Scots versions of the words, and the ones on the right are the standard Scottish English versions of the words. So we've got thousands upon thousands of these, and how to distinguish them is there's at least one sound change between how they're realised in standard Scottish English and how they're realised in Scots. So get thousands of them, and you can explore all these words yourself. Now the next category are the kind of trickier ones. These folk sometimes say these are English words, but if we're looking at Scots as a full language, as a full language system, as a behaviour, these words have mostly got provenance going back that predates the Scots Standard English movement, this elocution movement that came about to consciously correct the way that folk in Scotland speaking a Germanic language in order to come in line with the standard form of English. But these are Scots words. A lot of them are they are Scots words. They're used within sentences and paragraphs and phrases that align with the other words, the other Scots words, and they've got a history that goes back the same length of time. So words like leg, shank is a unique, a more unique Scots word to use in place of that. But words like happen, colour, close, girl, rain, wheel, loch, same, text. These are all Scots words I know. And what we need to get away from conceptualising Scots in terms of thinking about how our language works is the only part of the way that we're speaking as Scots. It's the full shebang, including all these words. Now, a lot of them behave differently, and a lot of them have got different realizations in terms of the sound that they make, right? So written down, these are the same, leg and leg, right? One way to maybe think on it is if you put on some form of standard English accent, like American or the southeast England. So you've got leg versus leg, happen versus happen, colour versus colour, close versus close, that kind of thing. And we find that, and we're going to look in a lot more detail about the sounds of our language in the next one. We've got something here like girl, which is pretty much a 2-syllable word, versus girl or girl or something like that in American English. So we've got girl, we've got this wee mystery vowel that comes in here for pronunciation of that. Rain maybe has that, rain is maybe, it's kind of halfway to that. Well, if we look at that when we're looking at the sounds, then we've got a word like wheel, where the wh sound, the WH sound, is pronounced different for a plain W. So wheel versus wheel, if you can hear that difference. And we'll look at that. And then another sound we've got here is loch versus loch, loch. You'll hear that pronounced with a K a lot of time for folk that don't have this Scots sound system, the system of sounds that we use in our language all throughout Scotland. Loch, it's that sound at the back of the throat. Same, text. And we'll find that text, when that became a verb, something that you can text one another on your phone, it behaves slightly differently in Scots. So like the past tense of that, you can say, well, I texted him, rather than texted, with a D sound in standard English. Or even here, texted, or text, without an additional sound at the end of that in the past tense. And when we start looking at the tenses in the video, I'll return to that and I'll explain about what's going on there with them. So here we go. Here's the top 50 most common words in the English language. So in the left-hand column here and here, we've got these most common English words. And when we start looking at this, we can see, if we're not used to seeing Scots wrote down, we can actually see that there's quite a lot of difference between these. So we've got the in English, which comes the, and sometimes that TH sound at the front disappears. So I went up the stairs. I went up the stair, right? So you get I went up the stair. I went down the tune, right? So that th sound isn't there, and usually that's spelt with an E. Sometimes it's spelt with an I. Then you've got of in English, second most common word. That's written with an O in Scots, but generally it's pronounced a or a. So one to geese, one of them, one to geese, one of them. So a or a. So that's how that's pronounced. Often you'll find folk that are singing for text, for written text, they'll sing that as a give me one o them. But it's no said that way. That's just, it's spelt with an O, but it's pronounced a or a. Some folk when they're writing Scots, because we all learn to write Scots off our own backs. It's fortunately now it's been taught in schools, and that's brilliant that folk are learning about the language that they speak in the school system rather than about the language that they're meant to speak, or that some folk would say they're maybe meant to speak. So that's just one you need to learn. O is generally pronounced a or a. He's one of them. He's one of them. He's one of them. He's one of the ones. Two is te. And is an. the D isn't there, and you'll find that with a lot of Scots words that they differ from related English words, with the D disappearing. Now, there's some dialect areas of Scots, like Perthshire, where the D is present, and hunner, for the English 100, becomes hunder. So there is a D in there. On my own dialect, most of the time the D disappears when, or the D isn't present. We shouldn't really say it disappears. It isn't present. And we've got ones the same. Is the same. In is the same. Is the same. It. In a lot of Scots, you've got hit. The H is preserved. So in older, way back in English and in history, there was an H there, I know, but it tends to only be preserved in Scots. So hit, him, her, and hit are the kind of forms then. But we'll look at that a lot more closely in another video. We're just going through some of these. You in English behaves quite differently in Scots. You've got ye. So what did you say? Written that way. For emphasis, it tends to go towards you. So if you say, I said to you I would meet you at 10:30. If you're wanting to emphasize who you're talking to, you would say, I said to you that I would meet you at 10:30. Right? So you've got you and ye in the same sentence there. In most of Scots now, you've got a different form for plural. So in English, if you're talking to a group of folk, you'll say, I said to you to come here at such and such a time. Scots, you can say, I said to yees to come here at such and such a time. So yees is a form there. And then you've got the accusative form in Scots, which is ya. So you would say, ya dancer, or ya idiot, or ya beauty. So that's a ya form there. So that's only used when you're kind of making an exclamation, right? So we've got about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 5 different forms of the word you, where standard English has only got the one form. So we've got that. Then that, and that's another one where the TH can disappear. So that, we've got that. And then there's another form that tends to exist in spoken Scots. If you were saying, oh, he was the one that came down the road the other night, that you've got that. But if you said, well, who, you would say, well, what boy came down? Then you would say, well, that boy. So you can hear that's got an ah sound when you're saying that, when you're using it indicatively. But if you say, he was the one that did it, it tends to go that. It tends to be a reduced vowel. So that's something in there. He, which is the same, was versus was, for versus for, fir, some dialects it's FIR, fir, or for, tends to be that. And here's an interesting one for on in English. That's got the O sound, but it tends to be own, and so sometimes you'll see folks spelling that O-A-N. But generally, if there's an O in a Scots spelling, it's pronounced O. So own, the bus stop, you've got to do that kind of thing. It's pronounced that way if it's spelled with an O. R versus that's generally realised as So you've got aren't in English, the negative form, and then arnie and Scots. Arnie does exist, but most folk will say arnie. That's not a traditional spelling that you are, but a lot of folk use it. With, way, or wi. Sometimes it's just spelled W-I, which is the more traditional spelling. Way tends to be the kind of south and west of Scotland. Folk will want to spell it this way, but that's with. As, sometimes that's pronounced as, rather than as. Is the general pronunciation. Occasionally it's, in some dialects, it's used emphatically as I. Who said that? I said that. But in my own dialect and a lot of dialects through Scotland, is the emphatic form. So it'd be, well, who said that? I said that. So you would use it emphatically. His is the same. They, again, this is another one where the TH kind of falls away in a lot of spoken Scots. So they came up the road, you would say that. They came up the house last night, right? You'd have that kind of form there. So be, it's the same. At. We'll see that at sometimes has different usages. One for the number, that varies quite a lot in Scots. Ain is the kind of traditional form of that. There's another form, A, like the Burns song, A Phone Kiss, and we'll go into that in more kind of detail. Yin is there, and Wan, I know. So in my own dialect, I use Wan and Yin. So give me one of the yins, is what I say. Some dialects will say, give me one of the ones. Other dialects will say, give me yin of the yins, or give me ain of the ains. You get that kind of form there. So that jumps a bit. Well, for a wee bit a closer look at that later on. Have, hey is the kind of more traditional one, but we've got have and have in there. I know that that folk use have and have. This, again, that's another one where the th isn't there, isyin. And that these forms without the th, they go back hundreds of years through our literature. So it's no a lazy thing. It's a way that folk actually speak. It's a bad, if there's a variation between Scots and Standard English, it's generally nothing lazy about it. Folk aren't being lazy with their language. It's just the form that it takes. Because in terms of just language is making noises, this and this take about as much energy as one another to pronounce. There's nothing lazy about that. Fae, from and fae. Some dialects it's fray, but generally it's fae on that. Or, if that. Had, that's the kind of more literary form of that. Had and hud is generally what folks say. By, there's two forms there. So if you say, well, I went by the kirk and I seen her there, right? You would say by. But if you say this book was wrote by Walter Scott, right? This book was wrote by Violet Jacob. So it becomes that. So there's two forms there, and it's not pretty regular how they're used. We'll have a wee look at that when we're looking at prepositions. We've got hot and het. Sometimes het in a lot of dialects it's just in the game tig. Your het, that kind of thing that persists there. But in other dialects, het is used to mean hot every time the word's used. There we go. Word versus word. That's a spelling. The biggest difference there is spelling rather than a sound thing. But versus bit. I was going to do that, but I didn't. Again, that's a kind of reduced vowel, and we'll look at that in terms of sounds. Whit versus what. Very, very common. So most of these you'll hear pretty much everywhere in Scotland, these most common ones. Some we. Can versus kin. That's got different recommended spellings. Some dialects it's can, but most of them it's kin. Ut, other, were, or was. That's a grammatical thing that we'll have a wee look at when we look at how the word were you. Was you doing that? Is generally a lot of Scots speakers will say that. Or, all versus all. There versus there. Where is it? It's there. So that's another one where the th isn't present. When, you've got whan, which is a kind of older usage. It's still in a lot of dialects throughout Scotland. but a lot of folk will say when. Then up. Up's a good example. Folk will say up is maybe an English word, down is a Scots word. In fact, up and down are both Scots, so that's it. Use, which is comes in two forms in English, use and use, and in Scots that's use or yees in some dialects. Yeas, I'll use that. So this is good. In terms of sounds and dialect variation, this is one that varies a lot through dialects. Looking at Scots as a full language system with a history that's spoken all through Scotland, you start to understand how the different dialects of Scots relate to one another. So if you start thinking about like Glasgow Scots versus South East Scots versus North East Scots versus Shetland Scots, you can see how they all relate to one another. But if you take each of them and you relate them to standard English, then that relationship kind of makes less sense. So if you conceptualize it as all one system through Scotland, then as we'll see, these dialect variations make a lot of sense. Who, we'll see that in the question. How did you do that? It's got a different meaning in Scots. Said versus said, that's a kind of regular verb in Scots, where said is a bit irregular in standard English. And then we've got words like each, and we can see these are kind of older ones that I've never heard ilka and ilkane used in modern Scots in terms of folks speaking it, but you'll get it a lot in written Scots, and that's one that folk seem to have abandoned when we're using standard English as our main written form. Whilk is another one, which. So generally in spoken Scots, folk will say whit one rather than which one. The older Scots as whilk, whilkane, it would be in older Scots. So that's the top 50. But as you go through, and I've done this in the handout that you'll get, that you can download, I go through the first few thousand, I think. But I've went through all these to about 3,000, and more than half of them have got a different pronunciation between standard Scottish English and Scots as folk speak them. So once what we're doing here, as I said, it's descriptive. We're going through and we're actually looking and listening and seeing how our language system, this language system called Scots, how it actually works. So here I've related it to standard English, right? But we've got to have a kind of wider viewpoint. So Scots is part of a bigger family of European languages, specifically Germanic languages. But if we start looking at these words, and rather than just looking at them as we've got standard English here, the right way to say it, and then we've got the wrong way to say it, Scots here, right? Which is completely wrong. But if we take this and we start looking at other languages, we can see that these variations between Scots and English here, Scots and Scottish Standard English, are actually quite common across a lot of different languages. So what I've got here is just some body parts for Scots, English, Norwegian, Dutch, German, French, Gaelic, Irish, Welsh. Now, all these languages have had some kind of influence on Scots, and they're related historically, or kind of North Sea touching languages. And the universal languages are Latin and Greek have influenced all these languages. So if we start off and we look at these, we can see that a lot of them had words in common, and there's just slight variations in pronunciation. So we've got erm in Scots, we're erm here. Arm in English. So erm, that's one of the ones that's kind of two syllables, erm. Arm, then we've got arm, arm, arm. Then French at brass, and we've got the Celtic languages, Gaelic, Irish, and Welsh. You can see that they're more different. And we've got armpit, oxter, armpit, armhole, oskel, ashenhole. I'm sorry for butchering these other languages. I've had native speakers check all these words, and I've got a lot of book learning in each of these languages, but in terms of spoken, I'm not as conversational in them as I'd like to be. But in terms of exploring how Scots words relate across, particularly the Germanic words here, we can see that. So we've got blood or bleed in the northeast, blood or bleed versus blood, blood, blod, blut. So we can see Germans get a change in the vowel and the consonant there, blut. Sang, which we'll get in French. And then we can see the relationships between Gaelic and Irish and Welsh there. Body or corpus. So corpus is Latin, and you hear that gets used, particularly in older Scots, just to mean a general body rather than a deep body. Body versus body. So you hear that body, body. Crop. So in Norwegian, that's related to the Latin there. Corpor, corpus, corp. So the Gaelic and the Irish are kind of closer to the Latin there than the Germanic languages. Welsh, I know there. So breast, 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 brost, bosom. That's bosom comes in for the Dutch there. Brust, sign. With that. Cheek and chouk. Cheek and chin jump about across some of the languages. So you get cheek and chouk. Cheek, kin, wang, back, dew. So that's jowls. You've got jowls comes for the French there. So I said chin, there we go. Chin, chin, kin. So we can see like this next one. Chist and kissed, right? So kissed, the kiss, and you tend to find in Scandinavian languages and in Scots. So words like kirk, kissed, where in English you've got the ch sound, it becomes a k. So kissed, kirk, things like that. So we've got chist, chest, and in Dutch you've got cas there for that. So, and Welsh has got one that's kind of similar there. Then we've got words like queet or kit for an ankle, which is quite different for the other Germanic languages. Ankle, ankel, ankle, knockle, things like that. Ear and lug. This is one, some folks say lug's the Scots word and ear's the English word, but it's no, both are Scots words. Air in English, maybe I should say these in an English accent for to can emphasise the or, ur, or, uriel, and that. I, or I, oi, oog, og. So we can see, maybe you can see the kind of relationships between these different words here. Elba, elbuck in some dialects, elbow, albu, elbug, elbogen. So we can see that across the Germanic languages in particular, there's ers, arse, rump, reet, arse. So they're in there, daup and hin end or other Scots words for that particular body part. And we get finger, 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 good to say that. Finger, vinger, finger. See that they are fit, foot, foot, boot, boot, foos. You see that in football, football, foosball, things like that across different languages. Older Scots word for bile is gaw. Gal, gall, gal. We see that in a lot of different languages. Hair, and this is one of the things that in my dialect I'd pronounce that hair with an S, and we'll see a wee bit of that hair versus hair. It's the same with words like firm, firm, pert, part, game, that A to the S sound. That's a dialectical variation in my Western Bartonshire, and it goes into Glasgow and bits of North Ayrshire and Renfrewshire. I know that you have that variation. So that's dialectical variation of Finn Scots there. But here, har, chevaux, fault, you'll see that. Hon, there's a D away there. Hand, hand, it goes in there. Heat, head, hoed, hoofed. Then it goes into cop and coughed there as you get closer to German. So you can maybe see that these variations between Scots and English, where it's a vowel or a couple of consonants and a vowel, these different sounds, that happens across Norwegian, Dutch, German, Danish, Swedish, all these different Germanic languages. You can see the relation between them. So hopefully the idea of looking at this, and the Hona, there's I don't know, about 40 pages of these, and as you look through it, you'll see that all these variations in Scots happens across all these languages. There's that much in common, and by kenning about Scots and English, that gives you access to all these different Germanic languages. So it's a good thing to actually understand. So that's us looking at Scots at a word level. So we've got the words that are uniquely Scots, they kind of detail words, but I shouldn't undermine it like that. The words that are uniquely Scots, and some of them are actually more related to Norwegian or German or Dutch. The ones we think on that, some of them are more related to Gaelic, I know. So we've got the words, and then the words like this, that are cognates, that are related to words in English, but once we look beyond English and the other languages across Europe, we see that they're related right across the whole of Europe. We've got these words that go across there. And then we've got the ones that are quite close to, they're identical to Scots Standard English, to speaking Standard English with a Scottish accent. But the Scottish accent comes through this language system that we're calling Scots here. In terms of the sounds, they're different in terms of an English or an American accent or whatever. We'll have a wee quick look at that as we go on. But language is far more than just single words. It's the grammar, I know. And the grammar, so we've got the sounds, the accent and all that kind of thing, which we'll go into more depth. But if we're conceptualising your language, your Scots, as unique words, then we're cutting out most of our language. Then we incorporate the ones that are cognate with English and other languages in Europe. And then the ones that are closest to the English ones. But we've got the grammar, the way that we put sentences together. And that often is quite different for standard English. It's related because historically the two languages come from Anglo and Saxon dialects that came from North Germany and Denmark. But the grammar does have differences, and that's what we're going to have a look at. I think in these videos we're going to look at the sounds of Scots, the grammar, how we put it all together. This is the kind of engine of how our language works, the natural spoken Germanic language of Scotland. So to get a wee idea of this, like a lot of the time as a Scots speaker going through school, you get told that your grammar's wrong, that you're putting things the wrong way. So what I've got here is just 4 wee sentences just to highlight, just to make you aware of the grammatical differences. So on the left-hand side, we've got Scots with Scots grammar. On the right-hand side, we've got English with English grammar. And in the middle, we've got Scots grammar with English words put in to kind of get an idea of how these differ, right? So do you know like the school? In English, it would be, don't you like school? And we've got a few differences there. We've got the question isn't it contracted? We wouldn't say, didn't you like the school? that's grammatically wrong, and we'll go into that in more detail. It's do you know? If we're forming a negative question, do you know? Don't you is the way you form a negative question in English. It's still not English. So the in-betweeny one here is school. Now, in standard Scottish English, you'll hear people forming questions like that all the time. Do you not like the school? But generally, folk will say, don't you like the school? And English is throughout the world. So that's a wee grammatical thing that we're maybe a bit plenty within our language system here. Another thing here is the. We've got the school rather than school. Now that behaves, and we're going to look at this in more detail, a lot differently in Scots. It's a lot different. It's attached to roads, place names, institutions. You say, I'm going up the stair, rather than I'm going upstairs. Up the stair is how you would say that. Activities, sports, he's good at the fibber, that kind of thing. Languages, he's good at the Scots, he's good at the French, that kind of thing. So that's a grammatical issue. We'll see that in a wee bit. Here's one with a tag question. So you didn't like tomatoes, didn't you know? Right? You don't like tomatoes, do you? So we can see that there's something going on there that's different. We've got you do not like tomatoes, do not you not? If we're going to expand it all, don't you not? Don't you know is absolutely fine in Scots. Don't you not in English? No, the grammar's completely off there. I think that you're not like your dinner, right? I think you don't like your dinner. In Scots, we tend to, for some of these words like thinking and liking, we tend to use them in a progressive form rather than I think. We say I'm thinking. I'm thinking. You're no liking rather than you don't like, you're no liking. So that's, we've got a lot of different grammar going on there. And we're going to go into that in far more detail, but I'm just trying to highlight the differences here now. Then we've got another one like this, amorny, which is grammatically fine in Scots, particularly west and south of Scotland, but that's generalising into all the dialects. Folk are saying that. I am not, it would be in English. Ain't is seen as non-standard English. I ain't. A lot of people in different dialects of English will say I ain't, but there isn't a contracted form in the standard English. So there's no an ain't. That's not really considered a purpose standard English, right? So it's I am not. But then if you expand this, it becomes I am are not. So there we go. There's probably something going on in terms of how the sounds come together here. So we wind up having the verb to be, am, and are get used for amorny. And there, but we'll have a wee look at that when we go into more detail. We've got the standard Scottish Standard English form, amn't, I amn't, which is equivalent to ain't, and it also exists in Irish English, Hibernian English. Amn't gets used there. I amn't, but that's an editor that was working in English wouldn't allow that kind of language. Amn't. So there's some of the kind of grammatical differences. There's a lot of them. Once we start going through them, you'll maybe see just how many there are. But that's just to kind of highlight that it's more than just words. You know, it's about who the words are put together, how they're put together. So that's some of the grammar stuff. Another one, and that's just usually a good exercise if you're doing any writing or anything like that, is we've got this way of telling stories. Just about everywhere I've went in Scotland, the folk tell the stories like this, and it's no exploited. It's no exploited in art. It's no exploited in song. It's no exploited. It's very rarely exploited in plays. But it's a way of telling stories. It's a narrative past tense where you change the past into the present tense, and you add an S to the end of every verb, right? Now, as we go on, I'll kind of tool you up on the kind of linguistic tools you need for us to discuss that a wee bit more technically. But to give you an example, so yesterday I walked down the road, I seen my pal, and I came up the stair to my house, right? We can also say with that, yesterday I walks down the road and I sees my pal, and then I walks up the stairs to my house, right? So that's us changing the past into a present tense and sticking an S at the end, which in English you would only do if you were talking about a third person. So he walked, a third person in the present tense. So you would say he walks up the stairs, right? But I can say I walks up the stairs, and that you understand that I'm talking about the past. It's a past tense, and you can do it with second person and all. So if I'm talking about you, it's unusual to tell somebody a story about themselves in the past, unless they've been, let's say, sleepwalking, right? So you say, last night you were sleepwalking. You goes into the kitchen and he tries to get into the washing machine, right? Say something like that, right? So it works for every tense. Every person, first, second, and third person. So it's a good wee exercise. Write something down, tell a story, and then try and tell it in this way. It's pretty much universal. There's only been one place that I've known that folk have said they didn't tell stories like that. And it's one of the places that prides itself as being the most Scots-speaking places in Scotland. So I'm not sure that was in a school, so I'm not sure whether it was the Waynes it's felt like the way that folk tell stories, or whether it's a dialect variation. But pretty much of the thousands of places that I've been about Scotland, it's used everywhere. And you'll not get it in art forms, you'll not get it in song, you'll not get it in rap, you'll not get it in poems and things like that. It's very rarely used, but it's quite a unique thing, and as a storytelling people, it's probably something that wants more use, that one. So there's another wee grammar thing, but as I say, we'll go on and we'll go through more of that as we go on. But so some of the consequences are how our language behaves differently, and it's an oral language, so I'll go over a wee bit of the history of written Scots now. But then, mostly, the estimates are only about 2% of folk in Scotland read and write in Scots. We've got to up that, we want to kind of up that. We want literacy in it for my own purposes, and working with song and working with drama. I'm wanting to give folk lyrics, I'm wanting to give folk scripts where I don't have to go through all that stuff that's in these videos to explain it to them, because folk understand it intuitively, but then when they're confronted with a text, it's an oral culture. So often I find that the folk that speak more broad Scots struggle more with written Scots. So it's a good thing to kind of share this knowledge. But as a consequence of this, oral cultures tend to use a lot of mnemonic devices, ways to mind things, and some of these are like rhyme here. And because we've not got rhyme doesn't get rhymes fell out of fashion, I think, standardised poetical forms and things like that. A lot of folk rhyme. I like rhyme. Rhyme's brilliant. I'm a rhymer. But one of the things with Scots, because we're not using a lot of these words, there's a lot of rhymes that are not exhausted. Like in English, if you rhyme the moon with soon, that's seen as kind of twee, but because it's been used hundreds of times, but there's a massive amount of opportunity for discover new rhymes and use new rhymes within Scots. And in the whole of giving you the basis of a rhyming dictionary for Scots, because the ones that you get, just like dictionaries, even dictionaries made in Scotland, the pronunciation guides tell you the received pronunciation of these words in standard English. So a word like, let's say, water, right? It becomes water in Scots, but if you look at the pronunciation guide, it's water, right? And a word like, I don't know, cheater, someone who cheats, a person that cheats. And an English dictionary produced in Scotland, it'll tell you that the animal cheetah and someone who cheats, a cheetah, is pronounced the exact same way. But if you're speaking English with a Scottish accent, cheater and a cheetah are pronounced differently. Now, that feeds into rhyming dictionaries, I know, and what would be fun if you use a rhyme as part of your art or anything like that, any kind of art form that you use rhyme in. Rhyming dictionaries tend not to be a lot of use, even if you're using if you're speaking standard English in a Scottish accent, that it fails quite a lot. But so we can, if words like dance would never rhyme with once in English, but we could dance and once. Pain and wane, so we get this word for a wane. Greet and feet, so greet and wane, they're kind of uniquely Scots words, so that allows you to kind of rhyme with these words, like easy additional rhymes if you're using that. War and scar, rather than war and scar, don't rhyme. Hauk and gauk, so that's a couple of words that are completely uniquely Scots that rhyme. Dun and grun, so dun and ground, or din, don't rhyme, but dun and grundy, so help and scalp, kelp and spelt, so kelped and spelled don't rhyme in English, but kelp and spelt, selt and telt, felt, they all rhyme, whereas they wouldn't in standard English. So we use them in an oral culture a lot more for kind of stories and things like that. And we see this as alliteration, so we're starting to get into that. We say it's dinging down, I'm fair for fochten, or they're hard hearted, they're blithe and bonny. So you see all these consonants at the start of these words. Richroch, a moaning money or a maining money, and that's a pile of fish, or I'm away to my boys. This alliteration gets used for loads and loads and loads of phrases. There's thousands upon thousands of these, end rhyme and alliteration, and figures of speech. So we use a lot of figures of speech, and this is where you're wanting, as a first language Scots speaker, there's thousands upon thousands of these figures of speech that we use every single day. But when we come to write, if we're doing it in creative with the language, we tend to forget all these idioms. But idiom is a massive part of any language. You know, if you're learning any other language, you learn the basics and then you go into idiom. You know, like you learn in French that it's an April fish rather than an April fool, hunt the gauk in Scots. So you start to learn these, and this is the real bits of the language, and this is what you find with folk that are trying out writing Scots that maybe didn't speak Scots. They miss out in that much of these. So this is what you want to kind of explore, and you'll find folk talk this way up. There's a lot of kind of discussions on like social media and things like that, because folk are like, oh, do you mind, did you ever say this? Did you ever say heed the ball? Did you ever say that's all on? You ever say Jacob's in a shugly peg? The high Hegians, oh, you missed yourself. I was up to the one time. Oh, I stay out at the back of beyond. What time's it? Oh, that's the back of 9. These things are what folk talk about. So just keep your lugs open for these, and you'll hear more and more of them. And a lot of our language does exist in phrases like this. And it's something that folk miss if they're learning Scots, and you often find that they will only use these idioms. We use things like simile and metaphor. Maybe folk think of these as being part of poetry and song and all that kind of stuff, but we say something's like something else, or if we say something is something else for a metaphor. He's got a face like a melted welly. Oh, she's as thick as yesterday's porridge. I'm no soft as I'm glaikit looking. It's like a scale for the wood shaved off. Or metaphor, you're a chanty wrestler. It's a perfect. I'll unseeking your mince. Wheest your geggy. All these exist as part of our language, and it's not just the domain of poetry and all that. It's part of an oral language. It's part of like how all languages work. And there are thousands upon thousands of these in Scots, and they've been made up all the time. Scots is a fully productive language, so the spoken language shifts awfully quickly. Different part of folk coming up with all different ways of saying things that catch on, and folk will say that. So start thinking about these as you're exploring your language. And sometimes you get words that just like they only exist in these phrases. It's the only place you'll find them. So like wheest your geggy. So a geggy is like a cheap play, a drama. So wheest your geggy is like stop your dramatics, stop your amateur dramatics, something like that, right? Because geggies stopped existing in the 20th century, as a kind of general culture, folk wouldn't go to the pictures rather than going to a geggy, go and see a film. Rather than a geggy, that word's come to mean mouth, because folk think it means shut your mouth, but it's stop your dramatics. Another one was a chanty wrestler. When was it, chanties, folk won't really use chanties all that much today, but that's a word that's gone, and it's just existing in these kind of figures of speech. Verfochen, which was in the kind of previous verfochen, is exhausted through fighting. That's persisted, even though the word verfochen is less used outside of that phrase. So a lot of our languages is kind of still exists in these phrases, even though the words don't get used more generally than that. So that's part of our oral culture, I know. So that's something you can look at, and if you're exploring Scots, you can get into more of that. So I mean, through that, hopefully I've expanded your understanding of Scots a wee bit more. This is what is Scots. I can get asked all this all the time. So there's a load of different ways of looking at it. So we've just been through that. We can see some folk will maybe conceptualise it as a uniquely Scots words. Some folk will include words that vary for standard Scottish English, and the words that are shared with English and other languages. So we expand it to be it's a full language system, the full language that we use. So in terms of law, we've got a recognition of Scots. It's legally recognised. It's recognised by the International Standardisation Organisation. It's mostly recognised by linguists. Certainly, it's been a language variety that's separate and has its own system, different for English, for standard English, absolutely. So it's the Germanic language is traditionally spoken by the people of lowland Scotland. It's recognised by the European Charter for Regional or Minority Languages, 1998. That was ratified by the European Union, by the UK government, and by the Scottish government in 2001. So it's legally recognised. So that's a stamp of authority. It's from a linguistic point of view, it absolutely is a linguistic system that's radically different in a lot of ways for other languages. So it kind of requires that. It's traditionally spoken by the people of lowland Scotland. It's spoke all over Scotland. It's spoke Northern Ireland. It's influenced a lot of places where Scottish folk have went. You'll find bits of Scots in the English of Canada, Appalachia in particular in America. You'll find it in Barbados and Jamaica, Australia and New Zealand's got a fair amount of Scots influence in there. So it's travelled the world. So it's traditionally spoken low in Scotland, but it's general throughout Scotland. But traditionally low in Scotland's kind of where it comes from. We'll finish off with a wee bit of the history, but here I'll just look at some other ways of looking at Scots. So one of the ways of looking at spoken Scots, so what we're looking at here, so spoken Scots, the folk that speak Scots is their first language, a mother tongue, or that kind of thing. There's a couple of million within Scotland. The census was about 1.5 million. There's a lot of folk that will only understand that they speak this thing that we're calling Scots, or it's called Scots. So we've got spoken Scots, and a lot of this idea that we've got speak properly over here. So that's standard Scottish English. That's the way we're expected to speak. And then you've got bred Scots, broad Scots here, and folk are in a different a different part of this line. Now, of course, there are millions of features, so we would need millions of lines, because sometimes, so I would say a hin, a sclen. I don't really say a blow, but even in my family, folks say a blow. I would say below. So does that make me more broad or less broad? It comes in terms of each feature in Scots. So this simple line isn't all that simple. But to give you an example of this, so like I would say, there's no moon the night, you can't see it if you hand the clouds, right? So that would maybe put me pretty broad. That's how my first language, that's how I would say it. I could go broader by saying there's no moon the night, you can't see it if you hand the clouds. Or I could go less broad, there's no moon tonight, you can't see it from behind the clouds. Or there's no moon visible from behind the clouds this evening, right? So the night goes to tonight, things like that. So we shift up and down here. Now, I've spent a lot of time in monolingual English-speaking environments. So for me, I can swap between the two, and it feels to me like I'm being bilingual. I'm behaving bilingually there. So I'll talk broad Scots in Scotland, and then when I'm away Scotland, I will speak this way, and I don't find that it's an affectation. It's a natural way for me to speak in the company of people who don't understand Scots. It's part of realising your language, your Scots language, is quite different from what's expected in standard English, as to understand that folk only understand you if you talk this way, right? So, so for me, I can consciously be bilingual in that. Some folk will get more broad among pals and speak more proper and more formal situations. That's the way folk experience it. Often as folk that are just they've never left Scotland, so they just exist in this the social structure of Scotland, where if you're talking to in a polite situation, you would speak properly, speak standard English, and if you wouldn't, you would speak more broad or speak normal, as we would call it in my dialect. Now, this Scottish standard English, that's in a way it's a language that's been consciously constructed. So for the past 300 years, there's been the elocution movement, and this is the way that's been recommended. Initially, it was consciously, but it's just unconsciously. It persists throughout where history is the right way to talk, right? But basically, initially, about 300 years ago, the first generation that decided, right, we're not going to generally talk like that, wanted to drop the Scots accent, wanted to drop every single uniquely Scots word, wanted to change every cognate word into a way that could be understood by a standard English speaker, and introduced a lot of prejudice against it. That's in a lot of dialects, it's called slang, right? Or Doric. Doric was pretty much an insult, and it was applied all through Scotland, not just the North East. Now, if you go to a slang dictionary, you'll not find any Scots in it. You'll not find any of these words in there. You need to go to a Scots dictionary. That's how it's classified, in terms of linguistically classified. So, but this Scottish Standard English, it's a way that is people consciously decided to speak this way in order to be understood by speakers of Standard English. In the first generation, it was recommended the accent was dropped. So people tried to speak with an accent that was closer to the southeast of England in order to speak in this way, to speak properly. So that this would be considered speak properly. But in actual fact, all the sounds and rhythms and the sounds of our voice and our accent, all the things that make up our accent, they are within our first year, that's all fixed in our heads, right? So it's awfully difficult to shift turning our accent. And what happened was the compromise was met that this Scottish Standard English would be the way that people should properly speak. So this way became speak properly. So initially, this way would be considered speak properly in order to be understood throughout the island of Britain, right? This would be something like this. And a lot of folk from Scotland tried to speak that way, but they just couldn't, because it didn't feel right to them. But they could take elocution lessons and speak Scottish Standard English and slow their voice down and only use the vocabulary that would be understood out with Scotland, so that became a conscious choice. But what happened was folks' wains that parents spoke that way, that became their first language. And the folk are aware of this, who speak as their first language Scottish Standard English. They want to speak more Scots because they realise that their accent is via the Scots language, right? That's it. So it's, but that's a story that goes on here 300 years gone by. So we've got this language, Scottish Standard English, and that's a bridge between Scots to Standard English, and it makes folk think, I'm talking Standard English here, I should be understood all over Scotland, I should be understood all over the world. And as soon as you go outside an area where folk can understand Scots, you find that you're not understood. Now, even Scottish Standard English, I've found in parts of the world, and speaking from people who are further away from the British Isles, find even this accent, when I'm speaking properly, incomprehensible, particularly people who don't have English as a first language. They find the accent, the Scots accent that I bring into speaking Standard English here, they find that the accent itself impenetrable. So what we're going to look at in the next video is the sounds that make up the accent, and that system is the same in Broad Scots or Braid Scots and Scots Standard English. We've got different accents all over Scotland. There's hundreds and hundreds of different accents, but the way that all these accents work is kind of mostly the same, and we'll look at that in terms of the sounds, and that includes speaking English with a Scots accent. So we've got that thing. So that's the spoken language. As I said, we've got all these different dialects, byleads if you want to call them that. Insular Scots, so that's Shetland, Orkney. Northeast Scots, I've got Doric. Central Scots, Glasgow, Edinburgh. West Lothian, Dundonian, that's near Tayside, in South East Scots, Border Scots, you'll find every wee town has got a name for its own language. My dialect, Western Bartonshire, it was just talk normal. That was it was called, if you're being kind, or slang, if it wasn't. As I said, slang isn't. So slang tends to be a language. There's no strong formal definition of slang, but it tends to only exist. Let me see. So the microphone's working again, and sorry that the mic was going there. What a mention, or to boost something or something like that. That would be slang. So these are words that don't generalise through a population. It's generally a tiny wee local number of folk that understand the word, instead of like millions and that. And they tend to only exist for a short period of time. And most of the words that are used that I'm talking about in this, they've been used there, and they've got roots going over 700 years. So they're no slang, right? There's like that being my pan is used in the Barber's Bruce that was wrote 700 years ago. A lot of these kind of words that folk think on as slang. It's no, slang tends to be like words that are used in circles of thieves or pirates or things like that. That tends to be what slang is. But Scots persists all that time. So that's spoken Scots, and that's generally how it's kind of existed. Standard English got taken on about the 18th century, mid-18th century in Scotland, as the written language of the courts and for administration, right? And then after that, it got taken on for teaching at the universities. Edinburgh Uni shifted from Latin into Standard English to teach medicine, and then that informed the spoken language as Scottish Standard English. But in just about every other form of writing, Scots has persisted, and it's got this history that goes all the way back, written Scots. But what we tend to find, because we get nowadays, about 15 years of schooling and learning standard English, that's the right way to speak, is that even if you're trying to represent your language in written Scots, it'll drift towards standard English. So written Scots generally can exist in the creative arts. Folk do use it for administration, but generally it's used for poetry, storytelling, songwriting, and things like that. And it's got a lot of different ideologies in kind of writing it. So you've got the kind of historical Scots where folk, this was before the language administration shifted, they just pretty much unashamedly wrote to represent the way they speak. With Latin and French can influence it more in different ways. And then when you come to like Alan Ramsay, Ferguson, Robert Burns and things like that, they're kind of conceptualising, as Burns's book, poems chiefly in the Scotch dialect. They tend to use all the wee grammatical forms and all these wee words that we're going to have a look through a standard English, and they fling in the unique Scots words often. And it takes a bit of close reading to actually work out how that was meant to sound, you know. So gathering our brews like a gathering storm, nursing our wrath to keep it warm. It's wrong. That's for Tam O'Shanter. For Burns, so he's went into the standard English form. So storm and warm rhyme. you know. So you've got to kind of have this linguistic awareness, these tools that I'm trying to put across to you, in order to understand how the language works. Sometimes you've got folk that will only use unique Scots words, but with their grammar is standard English, and it sounds wrong to English, it sounds wrong to Scots. It's a wee bit tricky. You get folk that will use the right grammar, but they'll not bring idiom in. They just directly translate standard English idiom. That can be a bit odd. And you get folk that reject traditional spellings. 20th century poets kind of done that. Tom Leonard conceptualised his writing as a northern variety of English, but he's using hundreds of Scots words, but he's using kind of innovative spelling. Absolutely 100% valid to do that. In terms of writing Scots, I think everything's valid in terms of that. The question, is it Scots, is up to yourself in terms of that, because we don't have an editorial system for writing Scots. We don't have a structure with Scots editors, and we don't have standard style sheets and standard grammar that's recommended. So it realises itself in a lot of ways it might be quite disconnected from spoken Scots. In other ways, it's closer to spoken Scots than you would get for standard English. So there's a lot going on in terms of written Scots. You've the other end of the scale, you've like Hugh McDermott, who recommended using words for all the dialects and for any period of history. So there's words that folk maybe haven't spoke for 200 years, show up in that form of Scots writing. Some folk write like that as well. For myself, I work in all these forms. I work in standard English. Absolutely learn standard English. It'll serve you well. There's every European country teaches it, and people who learn standard English tend to get on better in life. Everyone should do it, but you want to explore your own language, you know. So I'll use a wee drap, and some of my writing, a wee drap in Scots. I'll go full literary. I'll go back to kind of older Scots. I'll go back in time across that. There are conservative and traditional spellings that mainly I'll look at here, because if you're wanting to express yourself, you can do what you want. You can arrange the letters in any way. But if you're wanting to communicate to somebody the way that I do in terms of scripts and song lyrics and things like that, and libretto, you need to have a kind of common understanding of how the language works. So you can spell heed if you want. If you wanted to spell heed, XRZQ, and then claim that that's to be pronounced heed, you can, right? If you want to spell it traditionally, you can go HEID, and more folk are going to understand that should be said heed. If you want to use the spelling conventions of standard English, you can spell it HEED, and then that's absolutely clear. It's meant to be said heed instead of head, right? And we'll see a wee bit more about that in terms of spelling. So you've got these choices. If you're using it to communicate, you're probably going to want a system that we're all using the same system. And it's possible to do this with across dialects, I know. So we've got spelling systems that allow, for example, guid and gid to be spelled the same way. It just needs to be taught. So we'll have a wee gander at that. I'll finish off here. So just to be a wee historical look at this. So this diagram's a wee bit footery here. But modern Scots and modern English come from a similar root over 1,000 years ago, the English and Saxon dialects, sometimes called Old English. The northern dialects for Northumbria, and that is what formed the basis of older Scots coming into modern Scots, and then modern English. So they developed in parallel, and English constantly influences Scots throughout that. But then about 300 years ago, we get this Scots Standard English that comes in, which is to allow folk that speak a modern form of English to understand folk that come from a Scots linguistic environment. So that's the kind of bridge that compromises, the bridge that connects modern Scots and modern English. And for me, we need to look at the full system, all the dialects, Scottish Standard English, how it interacts with Standard English to a certain extent, written Scots, spoken Scots, broad through to Standard English, different folks' ideas about what Scots should be across time and across different areas and regions. So the full shebang. It's once you get into it, and if you've got an appreciation for language, it's beautiful, and the full thing is us, and it's something well worth getting tore into. And as we go on through these videos and download the book, the link will be there. We're going to look at the sounds, we're going to look at the grammar and the actual engines of how Scots works. Wee bits as the dialects vary, we'll be looking at that in a wee bit through history, I know. But spoken Scots is the foundation of what I'm looking at here. We've got to be wary of the tyranny of the written word, because once we speak, the words only exist as long as we're making the sounds. But written languages persist, and we can kind of confuse them as being the actual language. But as I said, everything we're looking at here is descriptive. It's no prescriptive. It's not telling you about how you should speak, how you should write. You have to make your own decisions on that one. But that's what we're going to look at, the description of the sounds and the grammar and the basics, the engine that makes this language, this Germanic language, ours run. So that's us. Tune in next time.